Welcome to Liberty Voice USA, the home of unfiltered political truth, where we move past the noise, past the spin, and look straight into the stories shaping America's conscience. Here, every headline is more than just words. It's a reflection of what power wants you to believe and what truth refuses to hide. Tonight, we turn to a moment that's been echoing through both the halls of Congress and the corridors of political debate. A confrontation that left one of America's most seasoned legal minds speechless. Jasmine Crockett versus Alan Dershowitz. Two names from very different sides of America's ideological battlefield, colliding in a single, unforgettable exchange. It began, like many of these moments do, with confidence. Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard law professor turned media commentator, was on familiar ground. Known for his sharp intellect, his decades in constitutional law, and his willingness to defend the most controversial figures in American politics. He's argued before the Supreme Court. He's advised presidents. And in recent years, he's become a familiar voice defending Donald Trump's legal battles and calling out what he sees as double standards in the justice system. His words carry weight, and his presence in any discussion can shift its tone instantly. But Jasmine Crockett is not easily swayed by authority, especially not when that authority has built a reputation on bending legal reasoning to fit political narratives. The Texas Congresswoman, known for her fierce intelligence and unapologetic defense of truth, has become one of the most recognizable new voices in Washington. She doesn't shout to be heard. She speaks with the kind of clarity that cuts through rhetoric like a scalpel through silk. And that clarity was exactly what silenced one of America's most talkative legal figures. The exchange came during a discussion about political accountability, about whether justice in America is still blind or if it's been blinded by power. Dershowitz was defending what he described as the constitutional right of a president to make decisions that may appear self-serving but fall within executive authority. He framed his argument, as he often does, in the language of law, careful, technical, but detached from the moral weight of its consequences. He argued that the actions of Donald Trump in seeking to overturn election results were not in themselves illegal unless specific intent could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But Crockett wasn't having it. She listened, quietly, respectfully, and then leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. She asked one question, just one. "Professor," she said, "if intent matters so much, why is it that the intent of those who fought to protect democracy on January 6th isn't considered as noble as the intent of those who tried to destroy it?" The silence that followed said everything.
Dershowitz tried to respond. His words stumbled over themselves, caught between legal theory and moral clarity. He started to talk about precedent, how the law separates emotion from judgment. But the power of her question had already done its work. Because this wasn't just about law, it was about truth, about the moral consistency that our political system so often pretends to have, yet constantly fails to uphold. In that one moment, Jasmine Crockett exposed what many Americans have been feeling for years, that too often legal arguments become shields for political convenience, that the same principles invoked to defend the powerful are rarely extended to protect the powerless. And what made the moment even more powerful was what came next. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't turn the exchange into a spectacle. She simply sat back and let silence reveal the imbalance. Because sometimes the most devastating truth isn't shouted, it's spoken once and left to echo. It was the kind of moment that reminds us why political commentary is more than just debate. It's the struggle between intellectual honesty and intellectual manipulation. between those who twist law to serve politics and those who use politics to defend justice. Dershowitz, for all his brilliance, represents a generation of thinkers who believe the law can be separate from moral consequence. Crockett represents a new generation that refuses that separation. A generation that understands that the Constitution is not a shield for the powerful, but a promise to the people.
It's easy in today's America to mistake verbosity for wisdom, to think that those who speak longest must be right. But Crockett's moment reminded us that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that asks the simplest question, because truth doesn't always need complexity. It just needs courage. That courage is what's been missing from much of Washington. Too often, we hear speeches wrapped in caution, designed to offend no one and challenge nothing. But when Crockett speaks, there's no mistaking her intent. She's not performing for cameras or chasing applause. She's fighting for accountability. She's speaking to a country that's tired of watching truth get buried under layers of legal jargon and political theater. And that's what made this exchange so symbolic. It wasn't just about Crockett versus Dershowitz. It was about the deeper divide in American politics, the battle between those who see justice as a weapon and those who see it as a duty. In defending Trump, Dershowitz argued that political motivations shouldn't criminalize presidential decisions. But what Crockett asked was something far more profound. If we allow leaders to act without moral restraint, then what meaning does the Constitution really have? It's the same question echoing through every major political scandal of our time, from corruption investigations to congressional hearings. We keep hearing about intent, about legal thresholds, about due process. And while those principles matter, they too often become smokescreens for something simpler: the refusal of power to hold itself accountable. Crockett's question didn't just challenge Dershowitz, it challenged every viewer to ask themselves what justice really means in America today. Is it a technical standard, or is it a moral compass? Because if it's only the former, then it can be twisted endlessly to protect those who can afford to twist it. And that's what makes her voice so essential right now. In a time when disinformation floods the airwaves, when political identity has replaced civic duty, when facts are treated as partisan weapons rather than shared foundations of truth, her approach, rooted in logic, guided by moral conviction, reminds us that real leadership doesn't need to be loud to be effective. It just needs to be honest. After the exchange, social media lit up. Commentators across the spectrum acknowledged the composure and intellect Crockett brought to that moment. Some called it a masterclass in accountability. Others said it was the most honest minute of the hearing. But beyond the headlines, what truly mattered was the message: that truth can still pierce through even the most carefully constructed defenses of power. And that's what this channel and this story are really about. The idea that truth is not partisan, that justice should not depend on influence, that democracy cannot survive if its laws are only enforced for some. Dershowitz's attempt to intellectualize inequality in accountability failed because Crockett didn't argue from emotion, she argued from fact. She turned his own principles against him, not by twisting words, but by holding them to their logical conclusion. And when faced with that honesty, all the rhetorical armor in the world couldn't hide the contradiction. As the hearing moved on, the moment lingered. You could sense it in the silence that followed, in the unease that swept the room. It was a reminder that even the most seasoned political figures can be held to account when someone has the courage to ask the right question. And maybe that's what this country needs right now. Not more shouting, not more outrage, but more people willing to ask the uncomfortable questions that get to the truth. More voices that refuse to be silenced by credentials or titles. Because democracy depends on that. On the willingness to challenge, to question, to hold power to its word. Stay tuned, stay aware, and stay truthful. This is Liberty Voice USA, where facts speak louder than politics.
When Jasmine Crockett looked across that table and asked Alan Dershowitz to explain how equal justice could coexist with selective defense of power, she wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking to every American who's ever wondered why justice feels conditional, why some are punished for lies while others are rewarded for them. And in doing so, she forced the country to look in the mirror. The brilliance of that moment wasn't in its aggression, but in its restraint. She didn't interrupt. She didn't shout him down. She simply let the logic unfold, and that's what made it devastating. Because real truth doesn't need to fight for attention. It simply reveals itself, and when it does, it changes the entire tone of the room. In the days since, political analysts have debated the implications of Crockett's exchange, whether it signals a shift toward more direct confrontation of intellectual hypocrisy in Congress, or whether it's simply another viral clip in a short news cycle. But for those paying attention, it's much more than that. It's proof that integrity, when wielded fearlessly, still has power. Because what Crockett demonstrated that day is that courage in politics isn't about sound bites. It's about standing calmly in the face of power and refusing to let truth be redefined by those who profit from confusion. It's about cutting through the language of both sides and reminding the public that facts are not negotiable. And maybe, just maybe, that's how democracy begins to heal, not through grand reforms or sweeping speeches, but through individual moments of clarity like this one, where truth stands its ground and refuses to be diluted. In a time when so many political conversations devolve into chaos, Jasmine Crockett's composure reminded us that intelligence can be strength, that civility can be powerful, and that truth, when spoken with conviction, can silence even the loudest defenders of distortion. That's why this moment matters. It wasn't just a debate. It was a reflection of the kind of accountability this nation still needs, the kind that doesn't care about titles, status, or political allegiance, because justice, if it's real, must be blind. And if more voices in Congress or anywhere in American life followed that same fearless logic, perhaps we'd finally start to rebuild what has been eroded by decades of deceit and division. Because at the end of the day, the only thing stronger than political spin is truth spoken without fear. Stay tuned, stay aware, and stay truthful. This is Liberty Voice USA, where facts speak louder than politics.